My name is Rockefeller, and I got into mushrooms in about 2001. I went walking in the woods, and there was just mushrooms everywhere. And I figured there's got to be people out there that know what these all are, which ones are edible, which ones are rare, which ones are hallucinogenic. And so I started taking a closer look at them. And I think learning mushroom identification is really just about the same as learning a foreign language. It takes about the same amount of time. And if you only do it a few times a year, you'll never be really good at it. But if you spend a few minutes a day, every day, you can get really good at it and become fluent. It used to take me about half an hour to identify a mushroom. I have to go through all the keys in the books. And now when I see one, it's like maybe a half a second, and I have a pretty good idea what it is for most of them. So I'm going to try to teach you as much as I can about mushroom identification in the next hour. And most important, if you have any questions, just interrupt me and shout them out. That way it's more like a conversation instead of me just showing you a bunch of pictures. So I don't really use mushroom books, but if you like books, there's a couple of them that are pretty good, and the field guide you pick needs to be specific to the area you're going to look for mushrooms in. So if you're going to look for mushrooms, in the Northeast here, a good book is this Mushrooms of the Northeast, written by some good people, and it's nice and modern, so the names are pretty up to date. Another one that's really good, this one's written by Jacob Polk, and this is for all of North America, but it's the Audubon Guide. And he did a really good job with all the descriptions and everything in this book, so that's a really good book to have as well. And this is iNaturalist, and iNaturalist is both a website and an app, and it's a really good thing to use to identify mushrooms. It has artificial intelligence, so if you take a picture of a mushroom, as long as it has the top of the mushroom and the underside in the same picture, which means that you have some mushrooms and then you set some others down in front of it, then it's right about 95% of the time. But the cool thing about this is it makes a permanent record, so then real people will come along and identify your mushrooms. And that's one way that I kind of stay sharp and help people out, is I'll just go on there and identify mushrooms for people. Yeah, it's free. It works on iPhone and Android. But the really cool thing is that this permanent record has a 9-digit number, and so whenever you photograph a mushroom, you should save it and dry it, and then label the bag with that 9-digit iNaturalist observation number. And that way you have a collection. And just a couple of years ago, getting your collection DNA sequenced cost about $30, and now it's free in a lot of places. Mycota Lab does not offer free DNA sequencing for Maine, but if you cross the border into New Brunswick, any mushroom you find in New Brunswick can be sent in for free DNA sequencing, and that'll let you know exactly what it is and if it's a new species. And it's a really good way to kind of figure out exactly what we have here. So if you just go to iNaturalist.org, you can see there's 5 million fungi observations worldwide and about 10,000 species. And then if you look at the Ascomycetes, so Ascomycetes are all the cup fungi and morels. There's about 400,000 of those. And then the other big division is the Basidiomycetes, and that's all of the guild mushrooms, and that's most of what people photograph, so like 4 million of those worldwide. And then if you just look at guild mushrooms, agaricales, there's like 2 million. And if you look for agaricales just in the state of Maine, then we have about 35,000 observations with 700 species. So the cool thing about this is that you can go in here and make a field guide for anything you want, and it's sorted by how common they are. So the most commonly observed mushroom in Maine, Amanita muscaria. And then this Amanita flavoconia, also super common. And then if you just like learn the top 10, then you'll learn like all the most common mushrooms here. And it's really neat in that here I have a URL that shows just the psilocybin mushrooms. So you can see that we have 117 species of psilocybin mushrooms worldwide. And if we just go into Maine, you can see that we have 8 psilocybin mushrooms in Maine. And if you want to see exactly where to find them, you can go to the map. And you can see that they're mostly concentrated on the coast, although I think that's just where the people are. So they're probably pretty evenly distributed, but you can like zoom way in here and see exactly where people have found these things. And if you zoom way in, so here's Portland, or we can just click on one of the random ones here. This one is the most common psilocybin mushroom in Maine, Gymnopilus luteus. And it's really big, it's really bitter, super common. This one was observed by Tom Bigelow, September 2024. And if we go to the details, you can see the exact coordinates here. And the accuracy of this is 170 meters, so it'd probably take you like 5 minutes to find it. But the accuracy on a lot of these is like 3 meters, so you can just go exactly which tree. So when I find psilocybin mushrooms, I always make an iNaturalist observation, and unless there's like 100 pounds of them, I'll leave the geoprivacy to open so anybody can go to that exact tree and find them. And you can just like paste this into Google Maps and get directions. And so it's a really good way to find stuff. But you can put any species in here. So if you're wondering like, where do morels grow in Maine? You can just put that in here. And you can see worldwide, there's like 48,000 observations. But if we put in Maine, you can see that these are all the morel spots in Maine. And you can zoom way in and see exactly what they're found and that sort of thing. It should be morel season right around now, so it's a really good time to look for these things.
Does it tell you on the site when is a good time to possibly harvest or forage for the same stuff?
So you can look on there and see when other people found it, but it doesn't exactly give you a graph of when it's found in any individual area. But recently I wrote a program which I'm going to release soon, and it gives you a really nice graph of exactly where any species, what time of year it occurs in any given area. And that works pretty well, but it's not like a native thing on iNaturalist. Yeah, it shows the time of year was most commonly found, but that doesn't do you a lot of good because there are different times of year in different parts of the world. So to be able to zoom in, because morel season in California can be winter or spring, and then the morel season in Georgia was like 2 months ago, and they're long done in Georgia, but now in Maine, it's just starting. So kind of depends on the soil temperature, which is different everywhere. So here are the morels in Maine. And you can see there's 3 species of morels that are found in Maine. The most common one is Morchella americana. And that one is found with hardwoods like ash and elm or poplar. And then you have a black morel and Morchella angusticeps. And Morchella importuna is kind of rare. You might see that in woodchip landscaping. There's the map of the morels in Maine. And then you can also tack on to the end of any iNaturalist URL, field DNA barcode ITS, and it shows you only the ones that have been DNA barcoded. That way you don't have all the misidentifications, and you see only the ones that have been DNA verified. There is what a DNA sequence looks like. And so here are just a bunch of guild mushrooms, and there's a lot of them, but guild mushrooms are probably like the most interesting mushrooms to me at least, and some of the funnest ones to find. And then you have polypores, and the polypores have tons of little pores on the underside. This one here is a turkey tail, and you can tell it's a turkey tail because if you look really closely, you can barely see the pores. If they were much smaller, it would look smooth. And then here are boletes. And a lot of the boletes are poisonous, but a lot of them are the best edibles. These particular boletes are porcini, and you have several porcini in Maine. This one is a king bolete, and this one is a butter bolete. The butter boletes stain blue. This one's a bitter bolete, so it's not poisonous, but it'll ruin your meal if you try to cook it. Another bitter bolete. If they stain blue, you can write on them. And then here's a really poisonous bolete. So a lot of the really poisonous boletes have red pores. So you kind of have to know your boletes before you eat them. There's a lot. You know, here in Maine, there's probably more than 100 species of boletes. And then another big classification is the stinkhorns. So a stinkhorn will hatch out of an egg. There's egg cut in half, and then it just grows out of that. And then here's a toothed mushroom. So these make their spores on teeth, so they're covered in little teeth all over them. Or you have bird's nest fungi. So they look like a bird's nest, and then the spores are made on the egg. So if a raindrop hits these things, it splashes the spores out. There's a whole bunch of different puffballs. This one has little pyramid spines all over it. And all of the puffballs are edible, unless it's an earth ball, in which case it's purple when you cut it open if it's mature. There's a lot of chanterelles in Maine, and all of the chanterelles are edible. Chanterelles have really wide gills and always kind of this golden color. They usually smell like apricots. And if you take them and peel them, they peel like string cheese. The morels are the most popular edibles. They're also some of the most poisonous edibles. If you eat them raw, you can die, but usually you just get really sick, so you have to cook them. Most edible mushrooms, if you eat them raw, you're fine, but not morels. And then these are false morels. There's a lot of different kinds of false morels, but these particular ones can be deadly. They're not very easy to mistake for morels, if you know what to look for. Here's another false morel called a verpa, and these false morels are good edibles. The elephant saddle is also kind of related to morels. They have this crazy stem texture, and those are good edibles. And then there's a bunch of different jelly fungi, and these can be white or orange, and they have a texture that's really soft, like jelly. All of them are edible, but they have no flavor. A lot of times they would call that witch's butter. And there's a bunch of different club fungi. They're generally edible unless they're bitter. Yeah, and some of them are bitter and sweet at the same time. So the cap color is one of the first things you'll notice about mushrooms. But you know, mushrooms have tons of chemicals in them, and so do plants. But plants seem to have chemicals for good reasons, like to deter herbivores. But when you look at the chemicals in mushrooms, usually we just have no idea why the chemicals are in there. And that's one thing I love about mushrooms, is that anytime you ask a question about mushrooms that starts with the word why, the answer is always the same. I don't know. And that's because we just don't understand like the evolutionary pressures. It's almost like they're in some parallel dimension. But they have a ton of pigment chemicals in there that give you different colors. And the color has nothing to do with the edibility. So in plants and animals, sometimes the color like warns against predators, but mushrooms don't care about predators. If you pick every mushroom in the forest and then come back in a month, there'll be just as many mushrooms as if you had picked no mushrooms and came back in a month. And that's because most of the mushroom is underground. This is just the fruit, so picking it, kind of like picking the apple off of a tree. And that means that there's no pressure for them to make toxins, but there's also no reason for them not to make toxins. So almost every mushroom would have like 1,000 different chemicals in them. And these are just natural chemicals that are produced for who knows what reason. And some of them are highly colored. So here's Amanita muscaria. This is a poisonous mushroom with a red cap. It's also an edible mushroom if you prepare it correctly, and a psychoactive mushroom if you prepare it correctly. So it's really all three, but generally, if you just eat it, you'll feel kind of sick, so you can call it poisonous. Anyway, poisonous mushroom with a red cap, and an edible mushroom with a red cap. And here's a edible mushroom, some people say poisonous, with a orange cap, and a poisonous mushroom with an orange cap. This is a jack-o'-lantern or omphalodus. And then here's an edible mushroom with a yellow cap, and a poisonous mushroom with a yellow cap, and a deadly mushroom with kind of a brown-green cap, and an edible mushroom with a green cap. Here's a blue, maybe poisonous mushroom, and a blue-capped edible mushroom. The cap color has nothing to do with the edibility. What you have to do if you want to know if a mushroom is edible is just know which species it is. And once you identify the species, then you can ask people or Google and just figure out if it's edible or not. But what does have something to do with edibility, a lot more to do with edibility, is the spore color. So that's just the color of the spores that it makes. And so mushrooms are typically organized by spore color because spore color does actually have something to do with what it's related to. So here is a white-spored mushroom. This is one of those delicious edible amanitas. And here's a pink-spored mushroom. This is Vulvopluteus. This is a good edible. But one thing you'll notice is that when it's younger, the gills start out white. So like the gills in this would be pure white. And then as the spores mature, the gills change color to be the color of, the spores. So you can see the gills are turning pink here. So if you pay attention to how the gills change color as the mushroom matures, then you don't have to bring the mushroom home and do hours of work waiting for a spore print. And you can just interrupt me. You don't have to raise your hand because I don't really notice raised hands. Yeah, these are really easily mistaken for the death caps. We saw the death caps a little bit ago. Death caps will not have gills that turn pink because death caps are white-spored mushrooms. And so a young death cap has white spores, and a really old death cap has white spores. This pink-spored thing, you'll notice the gills turning colors. Also, death caps have a ring on the stem. These never have a ring on the stem, but they both hatch out of eggs. So this looks very similar to a destroying angel or a death cap, but it's a reasonable edible. What's that? Well, okay, so the deadly amanitas, they grow only with certain trees, usually oak or pine. These like grassy areas or wood chips, so they can grow near each other, but they're really growing off of very different things. So you're much more likely to find this out in a field or somewhere that's not near trees. But if you're like under an oak tree, then you could definitely find both of these like growing right next to each other. But you'll never mistake them once you find each one a few hundred times. These are like all floppy. But you definitely kind of have to pay attention. But really the only people that get poisoned by mushrooms are people that are not making any effort to identify their mushrooms. It's extremely rare that someone tries to identify the mushroom, makes a mistake, and then gets poisoned.
Maybe around a live oak or a oak.
They need live oaks because death caps are mycorrhizal mushrooms, so they're impossible to grow indoors. They need the live oak roots, whereas this is a sapotrophic mushroom. It just grows on decaying matter, which means you could take it and you could grow as much as you want indoors. Here's a bolete, and boletes often stain blue. And so I cut this open and it turns blue. Turns out that a lot of the blue staining boletes are poisonous. So if you find a bolete in Maine, it does not stain blue and it's not bitter, it's going to be edible all of the time. If it does stain blue, then it might be edible, might be poisonous. You got to look it up. And if it tastes bitter, then it's just going to ruin your dish, but probably won't hurt you.
As far as like the health benefits and possible nutritional value from all mushrooms?
That's a really good question. Because mushrooms have so many different chemicals in them, a lot of them are really healthy for you. A lot of the polysaccharides and other chemicals that are made by the mushrooms are really good to consume. So one place to look that up is just like in the scientific literature, like you can search for it on Google Scholar. Also, there's a lot of Facebook groups. I started a Facebook group called Medicinal Mushrooms, and that one has a lot of discussion on health benefits. Also, like the Wikipedia article on any mushroom, if it has known health benefits, it'll usually mention it. So that's a good place to look it up. There's also some really good books on that. One of the best ones is called The Fungal Pharmacy by Dale Rogers. Dale Rogers lives in Canada, super cool guy, really knowledgeable, and The Fungal Pharmacy is like really well sourced and referenced and just a really good book. So if you like that kind of stuff, definitely
Would that whole leaf, would I have to slice it in half or could I like put my fingerprint in it?
Yeah, if you were to like start drawing with your finger on the gills,
probably it would turn blue. A lot of them, it kind of helps to slice it in half. But, the psilocybin mushrooms also turn blue. The difference is that these mushrooms, they turn blue, and then after 15 minutes, the blue is gone. A psilocybin mushroom, it turns blue, and then the blue is permanent. So even 20 years later, when it's dry, you can still see that blue color there. So these are staining blue because of a chemical called variegatic acid, reacts with the oxygen, turns blue. But if you cook it or let it dry out, it just goes away and the blue disappears. The psilocybin turns blue because the psilocin is being polymerized into long chains that have like an indigo blue color. And so a completely different chemical reaction. Also, there's no psilocybin mushrooms that have pores. They're all gilled mushrooms. Yeah, this variegatic acid in these things, it's not a very stable molecule. So you put some potassium hydroxide on it and the blue just disappears instantly. Here's some Cortinarius. And Cortinarius are probably the largest genus of mushrooms now. There's a ton of them. You probably have more than 100 species in Maine, but they all have these bright orange spores, so like a rusty spore color. And most Cortinarius are edible, but a few of them are deadly, and they're so hard to identify that almost nobody eats Cortinarius. If you ate this particular one, the only thing that would happen is to get a little bit less hungry. But there's been a few poisonings, so generally people will avoid like a lot of the orange spored mushrooms because a lot of them are Cortinarius. The Cortinarius is mycorrhizal, so they have to have a tree. In this case, they grow with live oak, so these are live oak leaves. If you're photographing a mycorrhizal mushroom, it's a really good idea to put some of the leaves or acorns or something like that from the tree it's growing with into the photo. Here is a brown spored mushroom. This is Foliota. And so these have kind of a chocolate brown spore print color. And you can't quite see the spore print color because we don't have any of those super mature, but I can see a little bit of a spore print, and that's right here. So in this spot, the spores fell out of the gills, landed on the stem, and enough accumulated that you can see the spore print color. So that's another reason why you might not have to go home and leave the mushroom like on some paper for 8 hours, because a lot of times you can see the spore print on the stem, on nearby grass, nearby leaves, something in nature.
Out there in the field, how hard is it to tell a chopped over round spore from a permal spore from a black spore if you're looking at the spores?
It really depends on the age of the mushroom, because if the mushrooms are really young and they haven't dropped spores yet, you just have to know the mushroom to know the spore color. Whereas if the mushroom is really old and it's throwing spores everywhere, there might be spores all over the ground, over any sticks and grass and leaves that are nearby, especially on nearby caps. When you have two caps that are overlapping, the cap that's underneath very often has a really good spore print on the top of it. Yeah, like a gymnopilus, it'll just make golden spores all over the place. And then some things, there's like barely produced spores. This here is a black spored mushroom. So this mushroom, if you put this on tinfoil or whatever, it'll give you a jet black spore print. And it turns out that there's no poisonous mushrooms with a jet black spore print. So all of the black spored mushrooms are edible, except that this one contains psilocybin. So maybe you would call it medicinal. And then some black spored mushrooms react with alcohol. So if you drink alcohol, it can be poisonous. But black spored mushrooms are the safest mushrooms to eat if you're just going to eat random mushrooms. Because there's nothing seriously toxic with black spores. And most people think that eating random mushrooms is really dangerous, and they're correct, but it's not nearly as dangerous as most people think. People eat random mushrooms all the time, every day, and only like 1 or 2 people in this country die of mushroom poisoning per year. And that's because most mushrooms are not poisonous, and most mushrooms that are poisonous, you have to eat a lot of them to get poisoned. And most of the toxins are not deadly. Most of them just make you wish you were dead for a couple days, and then you're fine.
They figured out like a way to like grade the toxicity level in certain mushrooms.
To degrade, you said? The mushrooms are so variable. So even like one mushroom might have a certain number of toxins, and then the same species growing right next to it might have 1/10 as much of the toxins. And it's the same in mushrooms, the same in plants. Like when you have a medicinal plant, one plant might be 10 times stronger than the plant next to it. And that's why they try to like standardize the dosage. And also, every toxin affects everybody differently. So the same mushroom that would kill one person, the next person, if they ate the same amount of the same mushroom, they might not even notice anything. But yeah, in general, some mushrooms are a lot more toxic than others. And the quicker you get sick, the less likely it is that you'll have a big problem. For example, if you eat a bunch of mushrooms and you get sick within half an hour, you're going to be fine in a couple days. If you eat a bunch of mushrooms and you're fine for 12 hours, and then you get sick, then you're going to stay sick for a week, and then you're going to die. And also, when you taste a poisonous plant, it usually tastes pretty bad because they're trying to deter predators, but the poisonous mushrooms, deadly mushrooms, they taste just fine. And so, like when I'm hiking with a big group and I find a deadly mushroom, the first thing I'll do is pick it up, show them the deadly mushroom, and then take a big bite out of it. And that's to show that they have no flavor, and I let people taste it, but also you gotta swallow a pretty significant amount of a mushroom to get poisoned. So just tasting a deadly mushroom is totally safe, but there's a lot of plants out there that you do not wanna even taste. Poison ivy, or a bunch of other ones. So plants are a lot more dangerous than mushrooms because plants are in an arms race with all the herbivores. They're trying to poison the herbivores are trying to get immunity to the toxins, and they get more and more poisonous, and the more poisonous plants survive better. Whereas the more poisonous mushrooms don't survive better, they're just poisonous randomly.
It's also about stability, like the antitoxins are the little circular peptides, that's what you never have, and that you can't cook ever and it's safe in any way, so they're always toxic. Whereas like the Jaromitra, the Pulse Morel, has something you toxin can cook out. So
yeah, for sure. Some toxins are heat stable, and you cook the mushroom, even if you cook it all day, it's still deadly. Other mushrooms are deadly, like morels, but as soon as you cook them, they become edible. And there's so many different toxins in mushrooms, and some of the toxins in mushrooms, we don't even know what the molecule is yet. So that's why you can't just take a mushroom and put it into a chemical analysis machine, a mass spec, and see if it's poisonous or not, because we don't even know what some of the poisonous molecules are.
What would you say is the first out of the time that you find a mushroom
Mushroom is poisonous versus not.
That's a really good question, and it varies by the time of year and what kind of trees that you're under. But in general, I would say that 70% of mushrooms are edible. Another 10 to 20% are not edible just because they're bitter or they're too tough or they have a disagreeable texture. And then about 10% of them are actually poisonous. And then 1% of them, on average, would kill you. And about 1% are hallucinogenic. So people that are looking for magic mushrooms and just eating random mushrooms, they'll probably get poisoned before they find magic mushrooms. But people that just eat like one random mushroom, odds are they're not going to get sick, but it's not a good chance because there's probably like maybe 50 or 100 poisonous species in Maine and about 10 deadly ones. So here's just a bunch of common guild mushrooms. And what I did is I went on to iNaturalist and I said, show me all the guild mushrooms in order of how common they are. And then I'll just throw them in here so we just kind of get an overview of the most common mushrooms. This one is Amanita muscaria. And so this is like the really iconic mushroom. So this one has a toxin called muscimol. And muscimol is, it'll make you nauseous maybe, but it's also used as a drug. It's kind of like the drug from Alice in Wonderland. So if you eat a small amount, nothing happens. A slightly larger amount, you get really sleepy. So it's really good for people that can't go to sleep. But if you eat a really large amount, you'll have a really terrible day. So if you're having a good day and you want to change it into a bad day, just eat like five of those. And the effect is like an overdose on Valium. So that's extremely unpleasant and kind of dangerous. But these are also super delicious. So when I find these, often I will slice them thin and I will saute them in butter. And then I'll just like eat maybe 4 or 5 bites. And at that dose, nothing happens at all. It's just really delicious. And then more like if you eat like 12 bites, you feel like you drank a couple beers, and 30 bites, and then you're like, wow, that was a bad idea. There's a lot of different amanitas that have that same drug. This is Amanita aprica. Yeah, this one's a fly agaric, is the common name of that. And this one, has like 50 different common names all over the world. So I usually use the scientific name so people know exactly what I'm talking about. But the common names work too. Whichever you like better is fine. Amanita aprica. This has the same drugs as Amanita muscaria, but more of a yellow cap. There's probably 5 or 6 species in Maine that have muscimol. Here is something Amanita pantherina group. These also have muscimol, so brown cap, but same effects as muscaria. Very small amount of muscarine. So muscarine was actually discovered in Amanita muscaria, but muscarine and muscimol are extremely different chemically. Muscarine is also poisonous, but there's not enough muscarine in amanitas to actually do anything. But some of these other mushrooms have enough muscarine to poison you. Here's a really delicious edible amanita. This one is Amanita bassii, and this one is found all over Mexico and Arizona. And this is really popular in Mexico. So if you live in southern Mexico, if you only know one edible mushroom, it'll probably be this one. And if you go to like restaurants, a lot of times they'll have dishes on the menu where you get this. They call it tecomate. And then this one, Amanita augusta, this one is also edible and it kind of stains red where damaged. All of the amanitas have a white spore print. Here's one that's really good. This one is really common out here in Maine. And this is the Amanita rubescens group. So they stain red where damaged. This is a photo I took in Pennsylvania. So you definitely have to pay attention to your amanitas, but once you learn what to look for, you can identify these things with certainty, just like instantly. But the first few hundred amanitas you see, you probably shouldn't eat. This kind of amanita is called the grisette. Grisettes always have a striate margin and never a ring on the stem, and all of the grisettes are edible. So probably 30 grisettes in Maine. And even if you don't know which species it is, just putting it into this group, which never has a ring on the stem and has a striate margin, is enough to know that it's one of the edible ones. Here's another grisette. This is a pink grisette from California. This is Amanita villosa, and this I call the world's most delicious edible mushroom. It tastes kind of like shrimp or scallops, and it looks very, very similar to the destroying angel. So this is a deadly mushroom, and it comes up under the same trees at the same time of year. So you really have to know what the differences are. And if you just look at any one specific difference between this delicious edible and this deadly mushroom, you'll be fooled sometimes. You got to look at like 7 or 8 differences. And so when you find a deadly mushroom, you should pick it up, you should smell it, you should taste it, you should feel the texture, cut it in half, and just like really experience all of the mushroom. And then after a while, you'll figure out, and you'll never get fooled, and you'll just be able to look at it and be like, oh yeah, that's a deadly one. You can identify them from 20 feet away once you're really familiar with them.
Maybe the 2 sections, the Vaginante versus the Louise.
Yeah, so Amanita is a big genus. It's split up into a lot of sections. And some of the sections are mostly deadly mushrooms. So this is Amanita phalloides. And so section Phalloideae has about 100 species worldwide. And so this whole section is named after the species. So this is what's called a death cap. And so if you take a bite out of it, it tastes just fine. If you cook it up, it tastes pretty good. It's not like the best mushroom, but if you're a good cook, you can make these taste really good. But they'll kill you in about a week, so you definitely don't want to eat them. So everything in this section, a lot of things in this section are deadly. But then you got other sections where things are edible. Like this section, Amanita section Vaginate, everything in this section is edible. And then this one is section Validae. Everything in section Validae is edible. So a lot of times, yeah, toxic raw. A lot of times you can just figure out what section something is in based on the characteristics, and then you don't even need to know the exact species because a lot of the things in the same section are edible. But you really have to dig into Amanitas before you can really figure that kind of stuff out.
Does the color of any of these change for the climate?
Yeah, so this death cap, it's like brown to green, but if it's sitting in the sun, it gets bleached, and also the rain will bleach it. So a lot of times, they'll look a lot lighter. And also, a lot of Amanitas, sometimes they just won't have a pigment. So like white forms of this are pretty common. But if they do have a pigment, then that is a really good indication. Lack of pigment is not a very good indication. But yeah, you can safely eat some Amanitas just based off cap color if you really know what you're doing and you know exactly what shades of color can be in which species. This one's called Amanita abruptum. I found this one in New Hampshire. Probably poisonous, but it's like really powdery. There's like powdery material all over. There's a bunch of them that look similar to this. Another super common mushroom is Coprinus. And these things, they look like sprinkler heads. Everything in Coprinus is edible. And they will also turn into ink after a while. So here's like a group of them that's getting older and older. And you can see the caps starting to roll up here and they turn into ink. So that ink is really good for like just using as a watercolor paint. And they're good edible. Here's some really old ones. You can see this is a full-size lighter here. This thing's like 16 inches tall. So that's one I found in southern Mexico. And then here's the ink just rolling off the cap. So there's like all these droplets. And so if you take these, you pick it and you just leave it in a Ziploc bag. After a couple days, you'll just have a bag of ink.
You straight black, or do you get it like a blue or anything?
Straight black.
You can use it as a vegan substitute for squid.
That's a really good idea, yeah. Works really good for squid ink.
Or you mix it with alcohol.
Yeah, a lot of mushrooms have a lot of pigment in them, and those pigments can be used to dye fabric, but I think even a better use is watercolor paints, and then you can make like really cool drawings with natural dyes. Another super common thing is called a pheasant back, and these are like the most common mushroom in the spring. They're everywhere. They taste like watermelon and smell like watermelon, and you'll see them all over the place. And every May, they flood all of the mushroom identification forums. One thing you notice about them is if you look real close, they have little angular pores. So they kind of like look like little diamonds or hexagons in there if you look close, whereas like other ones, they'll have round pores. Yeah. So those things are always growing directly from logs or trees. Here's a sulfur tuft. So this is also super common mushroom, one of the most common mushrooms in North America. This one's poisonous and it's super fluorescent. So if you have a black light, this one will just light up like a Christmas tree. It kind of tastes bitter and metallic, so not many people get poisoned by it. But if you're walking through the woods, you might see this 20 or 30 times in a day. There's the exact same picture with ultraviolet light. And so this one, I found it at midnight, and I just used LED lights to light them up. And then I turned that off and used black light, and then you can see how they fluoresce. The black lights are really fun to walk around with at night, and it's almost like a chemical sensor. There's certain chemicals in mushrooms that'll convert ultraviolet light into visible light, and that's what we call fluorescent mushrooms. And my next talk is in the little auditorium, and it starts right after this one, but it's on bioluminescent and fluorescent mushrooms, so just all of the glowing mushrooms. So if you like these kind of things, you can come see that one. The next most common mushroom are these inky caps, and these inky caps are in the genus Coprinellus. So it's actually very distantly related to our Coprinus inky caps. They're not even in the same family, but they turn into ink. These ones are super common. They're in almost everybody's backyard. So if you ever see a cluster of mushrooms in your backyard, it's probably these. They're actually a really good edible, but they don't have a whole lot of texture, but you make mushroom gravy or pate or something out of them. They're really good. They're really hard to clean, so when I find them, I'll pick them with the scissors and just cut thousands of them off with the scissors. And they're pretty good that way. So nothing in Coprinellus contains coprine. It's named after coprine, but the chemical coprine has a really bad reaction with alcohol. So things in the genus Coprinopsis have coprine. So it's a separate genus, kind of related, but not that close. And with those, you call that an alcohol inky cap. And if you eat the mushroom and then drink alcohol within 72 hours, then the formaldehyde just builds up in your body and you get real sick. These ones are called mica caps, and it's because the cap is covered in this veil material and it looks like little grains of mica. That gets rained off really easily, but when it doesn't, it looks really cool. It's kind of glistening in the sun. And here's oyster mushrooms. These are really common edibles, and we don't really have anything poisonous in North America that looks like this, but they always have white spores, sometimes really light lilac, but basically white spores, and then the gills are decurrent, which means the gills run down the stem. So you can see here's the gills, and they just continue onto the stem, and these are always growing on wood. So really common in grocery stores, really common in grow kits, some of the easiest mushrooms to grow at home, and some of the most common edibles that you'll find out in the forest.
Are they easy to grow outside if you were to cut some logs yourself?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's one of the most common ones that people will make with these plugs. So they'll grow the mycelium on little dowel rods, and then they'll drill into logs and put the mycelium in there and just water it or let nature do its thing. What you can also do is if you find these mushrooms, you can just walk around the woods with a portable battery-powered drill and just jam a little bit of this mushroom into the logs, and it's like using plug spawn. And then next year there'll be these mushrooms coming out of those logs. And that trick works to spread basically any wood-loving mushroom. So it could be oysters, it could be chicken of the woods, it could be some of the wood-loving psilocybe. Really anything. The mushrooms, what they really want more than anything else is to spread around. So you can make the mushrooms very happy if you take them and jam a little bit of mushroom into the next log, or if you take a mushroom and you drop kick it and it explodes all over this place. It spreads the spores really effectively. Just don't do it right next to the trail because it looks kind of ugly. But if you're way off trail, then definitely just feel free to drop kick the mushrooms. They love it. Here's another super common mushroom. This one's called Chlorophyllum molybdites. And this one will make you very sick for about 2 days if you eat it. But you can see that the gills start out white, but then they turn green.
So there's a spore print there. That's a green spore print
On the lower cap. This one gets super common when it's really warm. So here in Maine, you would only find it on like the 4 hottest days of summer. But if you go down to Florida, Louisiana, they're everywhere.
That's one of the most commonly consumed poisonous.
Yeah, this one causes more mushroom poisonings than almost probably any other mushroom in North America. Yeah, yeah, if you get sick fast, that's a good sign. Here are some honey mushrooms. Honey mushrooms are another one that's poisonous raw, but if you cook it, they become good edibles. I like them. They're kind of a texture like shiitake, but these are also parasitic, and a lot of them will kill trees. So if there's a tree and it really pisses you off, you can take a honey mushroom and just throw it at it, and it'll die. But more likely, you'll just find these on the tree in your yard, and there's really nothing you can do to save a tree that has a honey mushroom infection. But if you find these on a tree that's like leaning over your house, you should definitely cut the tree down before it takes your house out. But these, they always have a ring on the stem, and they have kind of a texture like shiitake, so they're nice meaty mushrooms, and often they're in big groups, hundreds of them, and so they're a pretty good edible.
So what you were saying earlier about injecting like the logs and stuff, would you be concerned if you did that around like living trees? It's spreading to those?
Yeah, I don't think it's a good idea to spread these mushrooms that kill trees. You know, yeah, so like oyster mushrooms don't really kill trees. They will eat dead wood, but they won't actually kill the tree. What honey mushrooms do is they will strangle the tree, so they will stop the cambium layer from taking up water, and then the tree dies, and then the mushroom eats it. But most mushrooms don't do that. Most mushrooms will wait until the tree dies, so they just hang around, patiently, politely, and then when the tree dies, they consume it. But typically, when you're inoculating trees, you don't inoculate live trees. You want to inoculate trees that are recently died. Because if you try to inoculate a tree that's been dead for 10 years, there'll be a lot of competition from other fungi. But if you see a tree that fell down like a month ago, and you can drill past the bark and jam a bunch of mushrooms in there, then you give your mushroom a huge head start, and it's very likely to fruit really well on that log for many years.
And won't spread to the other surrounding.
Not very much, no. I mean, nature is saturated in spores. Every time you take a breath in the forest, you're breathing in hundreds of different mushroom spores, so the spores are everywhere. And the living trees have defenses against the spores, and they typically, kind of have a balance, and it's all, totally fine. But, sometimes if you were to like bring in some parasitic fungi from Asia or something, it might upset the balance. Like that's an example of the chestnut blight. And then it just like kind of takes over everything. And then in a few thousand years, the balance is restored again. This one here is a ringless honey mushroom. These are super common around here. They're just the same texture as honey mushrooms, but never a ring on the stem. And then here is a deadly Galerina. So this one is called Galerina marginata, and this one has the same toxins as a death cap. So if you eat them, nothing happens for 12 hours, then you get really sick, and then you die. But if you go to the hospital, they can save your life about 90% of the time. Really depends on how much you eat and how quick you get to the hospital. These have orange spores, so you see an orange ring, and that's the spore print that's just accumulating on the ring there. And these also taste like cucumber, and they love really well-decayed wood. So if the log is covered in moss, it's very likely you'll see these coming out of them. Here's some Mycenas. Mycenas are some of the most beautiful mushrooms. They're all white spored. They're all small. Some of them are brightly colored. They're some of my favorite ones to photograph. These ones here, we have a blue color at the base of the stem. They can be bright orange. This one is, it has this like powdery material all over it. There's a ton of different Mycenas in Maine, probably 50 or 100 different species. So some of the Mycenas, this one's a bleeding Mycena, so you cut it with a razor blade and all of this blood comes out of it. And then here's one that's really common in Maine, but it's really difficult to identify until you shine your black light on it. And then it glows bright, bright fluorescent sea green. And so like if I see one of these and I'm not sure quite what it is, I'll shine the black light on it and then I'll be like, oh yeah, it's one of those, Callistosporium pseudophyllaeum. And then another really common thing that you'll see out there is Lactarius. And Lactarius have latex, so when you break the gills, this milk comes out. And the edible ones, if you taste the milk, just put your tongue up to it, it will not burn your tongue. The poisonous Lactarius, if you put your tongue on it, it's really spicy, like horseradish. And if it's like that, then you probably shouldn't eat it. This is one Lactarius that you do have here in Maine, Lactarius indigo. It's bright blue. It always has concentric zones of color. Lactarius is one of the few mushrooms that does this concentric zone thing. And then the latex of this is bright blue. So if you cut it open, there'll be like bright blue milk leaking out of it, and you can use that like a watercolor paint or to stain fabric, but it's a really good edible. So there's nothing poisonous that looks like this. A lot of people will cook it with eggs and then make green eggs and ham. Here's kind of a close-up. So like in this case, I only found one of these mushrooms and I wanted to take a really cool picture of it. So I just took a real close-up of it, like that. Oh, and then this one, I only found one and I wanted to make it look cool. And so I took a pine needle and I stabbed it with a pine needle to make the latex come out. Here's the Lactarius you have in Maine. You can see there was 44 species of Lactarius in Maine. That's a lot, but the most common one, Lactarius ligniotis, really cool looking thing, a good edible. Second most common one, Lactarius rufus, that's one of the really spicy ones, so a little bit poisonous. But all of them will bleed milk when you break the gills. Here's some more Lactarius. This one has a really strong maple syrup odor. And then this one, you break the gills and this white latex comes out. It looks like heavy whipping cream, and then after 10 seconds, it turns bright yellow. That's an indication it's going to be one of the spicy, poisonous ones. Yeah, this one over here is a candy cap. And so in Maine, your candy caps will be Lactarius fragilis, Lactarius camphoratus, and they're not nearly as sweet as the California candy caps. But if you take this thing and you dry it, it'll smell really strongly like maple syrup, and it's really good for making desserts. Here's one called, this one's Lactarius rubrolacteus. It grows with Douglas fir. You cut it open and it has red milk, so it's kind of red on the inside. It's edible. And then this is the pine version. This one has carrot yellow milk. There it is there. And there's a bunch of species in this group, but they stain blue, more like green. They don't have any psilocybin or anything. They're still edible, but a lot of times they'll get the green color in there. And then this one, the milk comes out and it looks like really opaque, like heavy whipping cream. And after a few minutes, it turns the gills purple. And so this is a whole group of Lactarius that has the purple color. Here's the Lactarius ligniotis group. So stuff like this is really common in Maine. These are all edible. And I'll show you a few Ascomycetes. Everything we've seen so far, most of it Basidiomycetes. So this is a completely different branch of fungi, really distantly related. But this one here, Morchella americana, this is your most common morel in Maine. Here's some that I found a couple months ago in Atlanta, Georgia. Here's a black morel. This particular one is a burn morel, so that's charcoal there. After the forest fires, they grow really prolifically. This one's called a landscape morel. It kind of grows in disturbed areas. And this is a big cluster I found in a garbage dump in Mexico. And Morchella importuna, that's another one you found in Maine, that you'll find in Maine, that has very regular ladder-like pits all the way up and down. And all morels are hollow when you cut them open. So it's just like completely hollow. So you can like stuff it with cheese or whatever you like to stuff things with and barbecue them. It's super good. Here's Morchella prava, another one that you'll see on the East Coast with kind of larger, more irregular pits. And here's a xylaria. So these things, they grow on wood. They're very woody texture. They're very common in Maine, and there's a lot of different species. Here's a lobster mushroom. So they're super bright yellow color. They parasitize russula and turn the russula into that. They're a good edible. And here's a cup fungi.
Do they only parasitize that type of mushroom?
I've only seen them on russula, but I think in some parts of the world they parasitize Lactarius. But they turn the Lactarius non-toxic, so you don't have to worry about a parasitizing anything toxic. Here's a cup fungus. There's so many different cup fungi. They're all really cool, beautiful under the microscope. This cup fungus stains blue around the edges. And then there's a lot of mushrooms that eat insects. So this is an insect down here. And so this is a cordyceps that's coming up out of the insect. It makes the spores, and these spores will go infect other insects. There's a few cordyceps in Maine, but if you go down to like South America, there's just hundreds, thousands of species all over the place. Here's a cordyceps that I found in Brazil. And this, when you find a cordyceps, you want to really carefully dig up the base. So that's what I did here, but I wasn't careful enough, and I never found the insect that was under here. And so I talked to the world expert on cordyceps, and I asked what it was, and he said it's not identifiable without the insect. But if you look at all the little tiny bumps on here, that's where it makes the spores. So when you see something like this that comes up and is covered in bumps, that's how you know that you should very carefully dig down and try to get the insect.
Do artworks for harvest that forceps on granular rice. Say this still, you're still getting better.
So there's a ton of species of cordyceps, probably thousands. Some of them are poisonous, some of them are edible, some of them are medicinal. The one that they're growing on brown rice is Cordyceps militaris, and that does have good levels of cordycepin. So if cordycepin is what you want, which is very often what people do want, then yeah, growing on brown rice will give you the good benefits. But it's super variable from strain to strain. So you can grow some that have almost none, and then you can grow some that are really potent. So if you're going to grow them, you should get the cordyceps from someone that's really reputable, like Jeff Manganero or Ryan Paul Gates. Those guys, they're both kind of in the East here, and they're really serious about collecting cordyceps in the wild and breeding them and getting really good cultures out there. Whereas if you just get like a $10 culture of cordyceps, it's probably not going to be very strong. Yeah, so one of the guys is Jeff Manganero. I talked to him on Facebook, but you can find him all over. I think his company is Appalachian Gold. And then the other guy is Ryan Paul Gates. And Ryan Paul Gates, he's got a company, I think it's called Terrestrial Fungi. Yeah, both really cool people that really know what they're doing. So if you want to grow cordyceps, you should get the culture from either one of them. And they charge good money for them, like 50 or 75 bucks, but compared to what you can grow out of them, it's not very much money. Yeah, they probably do. A lot of people sell tinctures, and I would definitely order a tincture from those guys if that's what I wanted. But what they're really famous for is collecting cordyceps in the wild, and then getting really good cultures, and then selling the cultures, so then you can grow your own. This thing here is Bovaria, and it kills insects. And a lot of times Bovaria is used as an insecticide. Oh, awesome. So it looks like, how much time do I have? 15, 20 minutes left. So I also wanted to show you some little brown mushrooms. Little brown mushrooms are much more difficult to identify. There's a ton of different genera. So here's all of the little, that's some of the little brown mushroom genera. But I think they're the most interesting. I split them up into the habitat that they occur. So certain things only grow in lawns, like Agrostomy pedioides. Almost every single lawn in the world has this at some point. It's edible, also find it on wood chips. Also super common on lawns, Cornocibum pala. The mica caps are on lawns, like that. And little deconicas. These have purple-brown spores, so the same spore print color as Psilocybe, but they never stain blue. Hebelomas are only in lawns because they're mycorrhizal with trees, and like a lot of the trees grow hebelomas, but this is one of the most mycorrhizal mushrooms you find in the city. And this one is common name is poison pie. A lot of them are poisonous. Some of them smell like grape Jolly Ranchers, like grape candy. More often they'll smell like radish.
Like an ashtray.
Ashtray.
Usually just like stale ashtrays. So I don't know.
I can kind of see that, but you actually have one here on the East Coast called Hemilexinum rubropunctum, and that's called the ashtray bolete. And that one smells exactly like somebody dumped their car ashtray onto it. It's strong. Inosebes, they're called fiber caps because they have really fibrous caps. They grow mycorrhiza with trees, but they're in almost every single lawn that also has trees. This one is really well known for killing dogs because a lot of them are poisonous. The dogs just eat it. They smell kind of yucky, so the dogs often die from that. So you definitely want to keep the dogs away from this one. And then the Amanita is the other one that kills dogs a lot. But here's another Inosebe. It's a pure white one. And then Inosebes can be purple as well. There's another poisonous one. So these have a toxin called muscarine, very different than muscimol. Here's Morasmius aureates. This is a good edible that grows in lawns. This one, you'll notice the gills are really widely spaced, and then they have a really broad umbo. So this raised part in the center in every cap. Paniolus phonisecii is also in almost every single lawn with the dark walnut brown spores. And Paniolus cinctulus looks similar to Phonisecii, except that it has a darker stem and darker spores, and that one contains psilocybin and is extremely common in lawns, especially in warmer weather. So if you get a few hot, rainy days in the summer, you can collect thousands of these in lawns. And if you look closely, they have these mottled gills. So other little brown mushrooms, you'll find them in the forest. And there's a lot of these, but some of the more common ones are Clitocybe, or this is Gymnopus, Deconica, Entoloma. There's some other entelomas. There's a lot of entelomas. So stuff like this, you'll see it way out in the woods, but you'll almost never see it in someone's backyard. This one here smells like rotten cabbage. So really strong smell. They're not poisonous, but they smell like they should be. The Cortinarius will always have the rust-colored spores. And then there's some little brown mushrooms that only grow in wood chips. And so here's like the most common one. This one is called Tuberia furfuracea, and it looks a lot like the deadly Galerina, but it's edible. So I call this the edible lookalike of the deadly Galerina. Another Tuberia. There's another Tuberia. And then this one's Foliota. A lot of these grow in wood chips. Pholiota is super fluorescent, so with a black light, they will light up like crazy. And then a lot of psilocybin mushrooms are found in wood chips. So this is Psilocybe cyanescens, or wavy cap. This one's got purple spores. It stains blue. It's most common in the West Coast, but it's turned up a few times on the East Coast, most commonly around Pittsburgh. But also, people take spores of this and mail it all over, so it could turn up anywhere. Here's some older ones. And here's one that's leaving a spore print. So you can see this, the spores have fallen and stuck to the leaves of all of this mint here. And so you can just very clearly see the spore print color. So that's what you call dark purple brown. There's another wood chip, Psilocybe. This one's like leaving spores on the cap, but this is where there was a blade of grass, so it's kind of like a reverse spore print there. And then this one, Psilocybe ovoideocystidiata. And this one is discovered in Pennsylvania, but it's really common on the East Coast in spreading. So very often when people pick wild Psilocybe on the East Coast, it's this species. And that's Psilocybe stuntsii, another wood chip one. There's some more stuntsii. And then Gymnopalis luteifolius. This, I think, is the world's most beautiful psilocybin mushroom. You can see it's growing on wood chip landscaping. This one was discovered in New York, but it's pretty common in Maine. And the caps start out bright purple, and then they fade to red, and if it gets older, they fade to yellow. They have bright orange spores, and they taste really bitter. That's a young one. I really like photographing these. Also, occasionally in wood chips, you'll find the deadly gallerinas. Like that.
What's the best way to tell apart Gallerana from Psilocybe?
Probably spore color. The Psilocybe is stained blue, and a deadly gallerina doesn't stain blue. So you see something like that, and you'll be like, wow, it's staining blue. But actually what happened is that the city came along and they sprayed Roundup on the plants. And when they spray Roundup, they put a green dye on there so they can see where they've already sprayed. So these are deadly gallerinas that are all blue-green just because they're covered in Roundup. It's not really necessary to take spore prints of all of the mushrooms that you collect, but you should definitely pay attention to how the gills are changing color and the gill color. Sometimes the deadly gallerina will grow right next to a Psilocybe, but I've never heard of anyone getting poisoned by picking a bunch of Psilocybe and then getting a few gallerina mixed in. It takes like 20 of these to poison you, so if one slips in, nothing's gonna happen. The people that get poisoned by these just don't know how to tell them apart. But yeah, if you put one of these caps down on a piece of tin foil or a microscope slide, like glass or white paper in the morning, it'll drop a lot of rusty colored spores. If you put Psilocybe down in the morning, it'll drop all purple-brown spores. So if you're not really sure, it's a really good idea to do that, especially since these taste like cucumber and Psilocybe also tastes like cucumber, and the flavor is the same. There's some slight differences in the habitat and the texture of the stem.
So after you pick them a few hundred times, you won't really mistake them.
But if it's your first few times, another thing is that these, they have all this blue color on it, but if you pick them and damage them, break the stems, bruise them, they won't turn any bluer. Whereas Psilocybe, they'll turn blue in the spots that you damage them. So that's a really important thing to pay attention to. This is more of that gallerina that's been sprayed by Roundup. I found those in New Zealand. This one's called Gallerina batipes. Also, you can see that it's going to have rusty spores because the gills are turning orange as it matures. Gallerina batipes is beautiful in ultraviolet. So that's white light and ultraviolet. Here's some Gallerina triscopa from Arizona. Really nice umbo on these. And some other gallerinas, the Gallerina vitiformis. There are so many different gallerinas. Most gallerinas are not poisonous. It's really just the big ones in the marginata group that have toxins. Another super common thing that you see all over the place is a grasser bee. You can see the spore print right there, kind of a median with chocolate and brown. And they have a ring, so this is called a partial veil. And as the cap expands, then it starts to break and drop, and then this forms a ring on the stem. So that becomes this ring that you see on the stem. So if you want to learn to take really good photographs of mushrooms, we have this online mushroom photography course, and that is through the month of June. Or I'm teaching a mushroom photography class here tomorrow. So if you come tomorrow, I can teach you everything I know about taking good pictures of mushrooms. Also, if you want to go to Costa Rica, we have this Costa Rica trip, this July 20th to the 26th, and we'll look for mushrooms for a week in a beautiful part of Costa Rica. So if you're interested in that, you can scan the QR code there. And thank you very much.